Hello, everyone. This is SIG-cluster-lifecycle on the 11th of July, 2017. So we have a few items on the agenda. The first one was that I just thought it was worth potentially reviewing our original priorities for this cycle versus what we're currently working on. Not because I think that anything we're working on is bad, but just because I wanted to, if we are making changes, I wanted it to be a conscious decision. But I wasn't organized enough to find the link to the document that captured our original priorities. So maybe we can do this a little bit later on in the meeting. I move it down the agenda as a result.
I don't think we actually did one for this cycle. Not like the last, not like the open-ended aspirations for the 1.7 cycle that didn't really come to fruition.
We should probably just use the 1.7 one because I assumed that things that we weren't working on in 1.7, or that things that we didn't manage to achieve in 1.7 would be things that we then tried to work on in 1.8. Maybe that was a false assumption.
So we did 1.8 planning. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah.
Yay, Lucas is organized. Okay.
Some weeks ago, maybe a month, I think.
Yes.
So in the chat there.
Yeah.
Yes, we did do this.
Also added now in the meeting notes. So yeah, feel free to proceed.
Cool. Yeah, let me put this here. I mean, I guess it might just be worth, I guess it might actually just be worth doing a stand-up quickly, which is something we haven't done in a while. But like, who's working on what, so that we can capture that, so that we have something to do the diff against. Yeah, who has been working on things recently who can summarize what they're working on in short sentences, small number of short sentences?
I can give a brief overview. Like, I had talked with everybody beforehand about the plan of wanting to write a proposal for checkpointing for the kubelet, and I had started the process and then kind of got priority inverted for a short period of time, and I should be back to working on that by the end of this week. There was also a bunch of PR reviews for Lucas that I had done with regards to self-hosting and getting the pieces of self-hosting in place. So all of this, all of the checkpointing and everything else was all related to self-hosting work. Because the conversation piece that we had is that self-hosting was the higher priority than HA, and then because it makes the upgrade process easier, so then we would go from self-hosting to HA as the next steps.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. Cool. That all seems consistent with the document for 1.8 planning. So we have upgrades and self-hosting both as P0s. Does anyone else want to give a short summary of things they've been working on?
So I just want to say I do have on my list to review Lucas's upgrade doc, and there's an E2E PR that is on my plate to review also. So hopefully I'll get to that today. But beyond that, I'm not signing up for anything realistically in the 1.8 personally.
That's fine.
Moyer, you want
to mute?
Yeah, sorry. You have to. Okay.
Yeah, so
there we go.
There we go.
You have to mute both of them.
Yeah, we got it. So I've been working on figuring out how we can do better TLS validation during the discovery process in kubeatom. I have a proposal which is almost ready to share. I did not quite have enough time to get it ready. I'm going to talk about it later. I also found a little bug yesterday as a 5-second sleep in kubeatom join. Got that fixed. as my very first Kubernetes PR.
Yay! That's good.
Oh. Are we using this raise hand function here, or how do you wish to proceed?
Oh, I never do that. Just speak out loud. If you
Okay,
have something to add, and then we'll do random.
Yeah.
exponential back off.
Just quickly, I'm working on Reshift, the backup and restore tool, and the biggest problem is getting adoption, getting people to use it.
I've been experimenting with an etcd operator that doesn't require Kubernetes API server to be running, which should like get rid of the circular dependency issue. And then I'm going to look at the add-on manager, which I've also promised for, I think, 1.6, but I've yet to deliver.
Sorry, what was the first thing again, just for the
a version of the etcd operator that doesn't require the Kubernetes API server. We call it the etcd manager, maybe, or etcd controller.
Cool.
Where does it inspect state from?
It uses gossip, and then it relies on etcd. You know, the store of state.
Cool. From just, I'm actually not doing this work, but just a status from Bootkube's side. There's been a lot of work recently on adding TLS to self-hosted etcd, so that should all be in now. But yeah, it's pretty new, and so we were just kind of getting it settled now.
Nice. Hey, these stand-ups are a good idea. We should do them more often.
One more thing. I took item 337 from KubeADM about to use the CI versions. So hopefully done in a couple of days.
Thanks.
Cool.
I have a proposal out for kubadmin extraction plan to its own repo. It's later in the agenda items as well. You can find the document there. And I've been doing random E2E stuff, but this quarter I really want to do more knowledge sharing around that so that I'm not like the E2E guy. Either maybe random Zoom meetings where I do like code walkthroughs and hopefully better documentation of here's how you add tests, here's how you add new variants of tests, things like that.
Very good. Thank you.
Cool. Got lots of thumbs up there. Okay. Anyone else with status?
Yeah, I have made a couple of PRs for kubadmin. I'm working on getting things into 1.7 that needs to get into 1.7 branch. We had some, unfortunate. Well, now when we use the node authorizer, we uncovered some misconceptions, misconfigurations in some of the users' like environments. So, anyway, so the node name in the cert and in the API doesn't match. So we're fixing that by adding a flag to override the node name.
Is there an issue for that?
Yeah, I'll dig it up later. Anyway, K Rivero, or how I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Anyway, it's working on that, the actual code implementation, and also some other fixes had to be merged into the 1.7 branch. I'm working on the upgrade proposal, and also I'm thinking about AJ a little, how we can, a little about what Justin said, the etcd manager, how to do stuff like that, and load balancing from nodes to masters, and so that it's possible to make a better upgrade plan for 1.8 to 9 or something.
Is there a plan yet to turn on the per PR kubeadm checks?
Would be really nice. I think Jacob.
Oh yeah, sorry, totally forgot to mention that. I have a PR in flight. I've been on vacation. I just got back from vacation yesterday, so I'm still playing catch up, but I should have time to look at it today. It was in a bad state, I think because of upstream changes, so it still needs some fixes. But yeah, that's on my plate.
Cool. Ping me when it's ready for review.
Cool. Let's just get to the end of this work in progress updates. Then, anyone else? Stand up. Feel free to speak about what you've been working on.
I've been on vacation, but before that, I had been tracking down a couple issues with 1.7. Specifically, I think what we landed before the fixes that landed were fixes to the daemon set not obeying no execute taints properly, and that fix is actually in 1.7.1. So if you care about that upgrade, and also there was some scalability fixes that came in late into the 1.7.0 release for the certificates API specifically. And it is still not fast, but it is faster than it was when 1.7.0 was cut. I think there's a limit of 5 node joins per second or something like that. Something not optimal, but better than like pathological, like it was when we cut the release. So further work in 1.8 will improve performance of certificates API.
Cool. That's good. Okay, so yeah, I guess it's just, sorry, does anyone else have any items they want to flag?
I can bring up 2 things real quick. They're not super important. But I took the bait a couple weeks ago, and Lucas asked for someone to implement the localhost check. That's now fixed in 1.7 in Kubernetes itself, but he asked me to port that back to 1.6, and I will get to that this week, I promise. And the other thing I want to bring up at some point is it looks like kubeadm is broken on CoreOS due to SE Linux, and we do have some SE Linux bits inside of the kubeadm setup, and the docs also say to disable SE Linux. So maybe a discussion at some point is to figure out whether it's one or the other, or how we compromise there.
So real quick, we're setting SPCT something on the etcd host path mount or volume, and that doesn't seem to work in CoreOS, but it somehow works on, I think it works on CentOS, but not CoreOS and not Fedora or something. It's really messy, and we're thinking that if we remove that SPCT thing in the etcd manifest, where it will work everywhere, like on CoreOS as well, but we have to set and false 0 everywhere as well. But I'm not sure if that's a regression.
So
really.
talk with, you can talk with Paul Morey or Eric Paris on Devel channel, and they can update the policies that will usually trickle down for all channels. So they could at least, modify the policy if you want to do policy modification, if that makes sense, or not.
I'm not sure. Ideally, it would work everywhere, and with like set and forth 1, but I'm not sure that's a realistic goal.
I can poke them too, I guess, on Devel.
Okay,
thanks.
Cool. So thanks everyone for the updates. I guess, yeah, this all looks reasonable. I mean, I don't think that there's anything insane here with respect to our previously agreed priorities. I guess just to reiterate that our priorities that we agreed for the SIG were close 10% of total issues, improve test coverage for kubeadmin. These are all P0s. Work on upgrades, work on self-hosting, and then request that other SIGs begin to move their control plane components and add-ons to use component config. So just a reminder, friendly reminder.
So
I'm not sure if you said bootstrap tokens to beta and some AJ work.
Those are P1s.
Oh yeah, so yeah, okay.
Cool. Okay.
One more note, not in the room here, but Andy, who's now working with us, is going to be working on some of the component config stuff. And I believe he was. Do you remember, Tim, what he was going to do next there?
We were planning on working on the scheduler together because I have.
Okay.
I had already talked with. He's already done the proxy, and that was updated according to Mike's spec. And I had talked with Mike when we were out in California about scheduler potentially being next. There's some logistical problems with the scheduler because of how it reads in information in two different ways. But we planned on at least trying to tackle pieces of that if this cycle. I don't know if it'll get done at this point because everybody's busy, but we'll at least get started. So.
The core scheduler config and not the actual scheduling policy would be nice to knock out. I think that can be achieved more similar to keyproxy than the other half.
Good stuff. Okay, I'm going to try and keep us moving in the interest of time. So I made a note that from what Jacob said earlier, that there's a PR in flight for turning on kubeadmin PR testing. That's just made it into the minutes. The next item on the agenda is that I just wanted to shout out on behalf of Lucas to please take a look over the upgrades proposal. It would be great to get some more eyes on this because if we want to change it, we should change it soon because we're going to start working on it soon. I think, in fact, we're already working on it. In particular,
work in progress.
Sorry?
I have some work in progress, but just locally.
Yeah, cool. And in particular, I think, Lucas, you said you were interested in getting feedback from Joe and Justin on this, and anyone else who's interested. Cool, thumbs ups.
I could also, if he has time.
Yeah. And then there's also a question, I guess, should we share the upgrades proposal with anyone else outside of this room to get feedback on it before we proceed? Anyone have any suggestions for people who we should share?
I posted in Kubernetes Dev on Slack and SIG on-prem and SIG-cluster-ops, I think.
I'd also suggest we should ping all the major installers, and that might tie into something we're going to put on the agenda for later.
Cool. Okay. And then the last thing that I had put on the list was just to check in with Tim. Sorry, Tim, to do this so publicly. How's the checkpointing in the kubelet going?
Yes, I had put a comment there. I had been interrupted with P0 stuff on my side for the last week or so. So my plan is to be freed up by Thursday, and it's going to be the primary focus probably for the next couple of weeks after this. So
fantastic. That's great. Thank you very much, and completely understand. Great. Cool. So then I think there's a proposal here that I think, Justin, you may want to speak to.
Yes, indeed. I presume this is my one. I'm just scrolling down to where we are on the minutes, but yes. So I think like kubeadm is making amazing progress, and I think the next big step is to get all the installers using it. And I think that will both benefit all the installers and will benefit kubeadm from sort of, directing, the actual problems that like COPS is facing and Tectonic is facing and GKE is facing. I know there's sort of unofficial efforts, but I want to see if we could make that more official somehow. And, we have our short-term like per release goals, but we don't like have an explicit we don't have an explicit like group that is trying to drive this big picture, which is to actually get kubeadm used by all the installers. So one way which we could do it, which has a very obvious flaw, but is a good straw man, is to like have SIG-cluster leads, SIG-cluster lifecycle leads from each of the installers, and like gain a commitment that every installer is going to use it. The obvious flaw is we don't really want 20 SIG leads, right? But I thought that was a straw man. I guess the two questions we have are, or I have, are like, are all the installers on board with using kubeadm? And I guess if not, like, why not? And then what would be the best mechanism for having a group that is tasked with the big picture of, like, you know, bringing back requests from the installers to kubeadm and getting kubeadm integrated into the I guess downstream installer tools like COPS?
I'd suggest maybe a working group, but what do others think?
So go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
I think it's possible for us to own pieces that would be common that other people could leverage. Like if we started to create like very simple reusable modules, like for Terraform, or I don't know if we want to include some generic Ansible Galaxy thing, if somebody wants to do something like that for this piece. But I think having the base primitives for reusability seems like an ownership thing that we could take on, especially once we get our own repository. I think at this point might be a bit much.
So I think I love the goal out of this. I think the key shift here is looking at how do we take kubeadmin, where the primary consumer here is people who are running kubeadmin directly, and we shift our thinking a little bit and add as a consumer for the product folks who are writing other installers and are wrapping kubeadmin, using it as a tool set. And I think that, you know, we built it with that in mind, but we haven't necessarily sort of dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Is that right? Or dotted all the T's and crossed all the I's, whatever. We haven't done all that last mile stuff to get to the point where we really know that it meets needs. So finding a way to actually force that and reconcile that and make sure that we view that group as a customer, I think a working group sounds like a great idea. I think setting it as goals, you know, I think in some ways we're resource constrained, but, you know, collecting designs and goals around that makes a ton of sense. In terms of adding leads, I think we're still across Kubernetes. We don't have a really great shared understanding of what a SIG lead is and does. The thing that I've been pushing for more than anything else is to have a way where the SIG lead is only a facilitator and actually has no real decision-making power. It's really about organizing and you know, keeping everybody on task. And so if that's where things are, I don't think adding SIG leads here. Now, what do we replace with, like, what is sort of the architectural steering group of cluster lifecycle? I think that's up to us to decide as a group, and, you know, as we sort of figure out how we want to govern the SIG, you know, who and how do we make decisions is something that I think we can definitely have a discussion about.
Yeah, I would agree with what Joe said, and I see it even a bit more extreme in the sense of, like, what we did at the W3C, a working group lead. Actually, you take back your own opinion and you're moderating, you're making sure that everyone can contribute, and you know, you're trying to balance between the different pulls in different directions and not, you know, trying to push your own agenda or influence that. That said, I'm happy to contribute to any kind of task force or working group, whatever. I'm not, Tim, maybe correct me, but I'm not entirely sure to what extent OpenShift, since it was proposed there, can or will be able to adopt that. But as I said, happy to contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, like, the having a group that, like, building the right tool for building the requirements for Tectonic also serves people that are running kubeadm directly, because people that are running kubeadm directly are probably, like, building something around it. So it's more that we have an example that is open source and we're able to work around. I guess
it's clear there's like a boatload of overlap between these things, no doubt about it. Right. So Lucas, you've been patient. What do you want to say, man?
Yeah, so basically I started to sketch a design for this, and this is, well, basically the phases thing. What I've been blocked on, though, is real world examples, because what I did was more like go through all the source code in kubeadm, analyze what's in there, trying to simplify and do only the minimal amount of stuff. and then from that, like, sketch a design doc for how the kubeadm phases work, but not the other way around. Like, what is the requirements from COPS perspective, or what is like the common shared requirements from COPS, Tectonic, and GKE, and what does kubeadm have to provide in order to be viable solution to drop in, like at CLI level, for example. So having a work group or something makes a ton of sense to actually get eyes on this, because I mean, I can like happily implement all these refactors and things and just go with it and call it a day, and then nobody will use it because it was the wrong level of abstraction. So I agree with the goals of such a work group.
So it sounds like we have consensus around a working group. I guess we should figure out who is, or the commitment that everyone is making in terms of their timeline for switching to kubeadm, and then who would want to be representing Tectonic, OpenShift, GKE, COPS, Cargo, Kube Anywhere, anyone I'm forgetting that is kubeAWS. And I think, everyone is, there's no exclusion, but anyone that is welcome, and we should do that. And presumably that group could also review the upgrade proposal as one of the first things they do.
So I think it's totally reasonable to sort of announce that we want to form a working group around this stuff at the community meeting, and solicit sort of who wants to be involved, and and write up a little bit of a charter there around, like, look, we want to build a common tool set to sort of extract as much commonality. We think kubeadmin might be a good starting point for that tool set, but we really need to start the dialogue with all the various, installers to figure out what makes sense. Justin, do you want to lead that working group?
I'm happy to, yeah.
Okay.
I think, Lucas, if you want to participate from the sort of phases perspective, like the kubeadm perspective, that would be wonderful as well.
Yeah, sure. At least for now, I'm going to work a lot on it, so sounds good.
And I think, as we talked about working groups, there were some working groups that were like sort of across, the project as a whole, and some working groups that were really sort of a subgroup of a SIG. This one's probably more of the subgroup of a SIG, right? But we want to make sure that we get as much involvement and as much as many people and sort of, giving us requirements here as we can.
Yeah, and from what I understand, a work group is different from a SIG in the perspective that it doesn't own really the code. Instead, it's more like an effort for like 2 months or something, whatever is required, or a year for that part, maybe for this thing. But anyway, sharing the SIG-cluster lifecycle, like general goals and code owning and so forth.
Sounds good.
So I'll put that on the agenda, I guess, for the community meetup, I guess.
Awesome. Yeah, do it. It has my blessing, and there are no dissenters. If you're a dissenter, please speak now to the formation of a working group to try and get all the installers using kubeadmin. Maybe the working group can also agree on how to pronounce kubeadmin. No, just kidding. Okay, who else? Okay, so Reshifter. Should we talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, I already mentioned the status. I'm really desperately looking for feedback. Currently, I'm a bit in a vacuum. I keep adding stuff, I keep testing, but besides within Red Hat, I don't really have a lot of external feedback so far. And yeah, that's all.
Cool. So everyone in the meeting, please go and try Reshifter and give feedback. It may also be worth mentioning the same in SIG-cluster-ops if you haven't done that. The reason I mention that is that ostensibly SIG-cluster-ops has actual operators of Kubernetes clusters in it.
Will do so. Thank you.
So you may find a more fertile ground of actual users there. Cool. but yes, everyone should still try it and play with it. Jacob, do you want to talk about the kubeadmin extraction plan? That sounds like a dental procedure.
Adding to the list of things that everyone should review and give feedback on. Yeah. So there's the link to it. At a very high level, I think we've already agreed we want kubectl to go first. There's a link embedded in my document to their plan. The little wrinkle is that their plan is much more complex by necessity. There are just more moving parts that they have to worry about, and they're more coupled to Kubernetes core. So the timeline keeps getting dragged out. And so at a high level, I wanted to kind of hit the same milestones, being n-1, let them hit a milestone first, prove out that they've got something working, and then let us follow in the footsteps. But their plan now extends to 1.13, which, if I've done my math correctly, is like 2 years in the future. So I don't know if we want to take 2 years to move to our own repository. But at a really high level, there's just a phase for removing cross dependencies. We have dependencies on Kubernetes core. There are actually a few dependencies in Kubernetes core back on kubeadmin. So we can remove those, refactor into the shared repositories, or there are a few tiny functions that are just thin wrappers around other things. Maybe we can duplicate code if it doesn't make sense to put it in shared repositories. We can enable, or we can enforce that we don't add new cross dependencies using Bazel rules. We have a Bazel pre-submit verify run that will, even if people are running make locally, it will verify that we don't accidentally add new dependencies. Mirror the code, the relevant code, mostly read only to the new repository while we build up tooling to actually do the build and release and handle our dependencies, things like that. Get that working while we're still primarily developing in the main repository, clone our end-to-end tests to run against the new repository, and then get the test infra bits working, like the submit queue and other Prow plugins. And ultimately do a shadow release with the new repository. At the same time, we do an old with the old repository with the old process to make sure things kind of line up before we do the switch over. So there are more details in the doc. Definitely looking for feedback, especially anything I might have overlooked. But please add it to your long queue of things to do with everyone else's requests.
So I have long-standing opinions about the repo breakup, but I will set those aside to say I think the only prerequisite, if we don't want to shadow kubectl, which I actually would want to shadow, is that the testing infrastructure has been fully vetted for the cross-repo dependencies, because that still is in this weird state where no one has done anything yet, and there's a lot of talk, and it slightly terrifies me because there are conditions that we've already enumerated that is not supported by the current testing infrastructure. So.
Okay, I think there's some prior art there with the way COPS does end-to-end tests, and the fact that when you run kubeadmin, we dynamically reference the control plane images, so we're not really statically linked to them. I think it'll work well, but it's definitely a consideration. Yeah, we should vet it more heavily, make sure we have a strong plan there.
Cool, sounds good. Any other feedback on the extraction plan? I will attempt to take a look at it. Great. So Matt Moyer, kubeadmin discovery TLS validation proposal. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so I shared a gist that has sort of a rough outline of what I'm proposing. The motivation for this is basically, the way that the discovery token protocol works right now. The worker and the master share a symmetric token, which would be fine if there was just one master and one worker. But because there is many workers, it means that any worker can impersonate the master to other workers. So if an attacker was able to leak a bootstrap token, a discovery token, through something like a node compromise, or through something a little less exciting like server-side request forgery against like cloud metadata provider. Anyway, they end up with a bootstrap token, and they have some sort of privileged network access to do man in the middle between when a new node comes online, sort of man in the middle, that node's connection. They can impersonate themselves as the master and do bad things to your cluster. I don't think this is an incredibly severe threat because sort of most of the scenarios that it applies to, it's not trivial necessarily to get a copy of one of these tokens as a totally untrusted attacker. It's also not trivial to have that kind of network access. The scenarios where I think it could be sort of dangerous right now are like physical networks where ARP spoofing, something like that could be possible. So I think we may want to call it out as a risk, but I don't think it needs to be like a CVE or anything like that. And it's an alpha code. There's a lot of mitigating factors. So my proposal for fixing this is basically to add TLS root certificate pinning to kubeatom join. So when the kubeatom init runs, you generate the root CA or you have a root CA, you hash the public key, take the fingerprint of that public key, and include it as a new flag to kubeatom join. Kubeatom join, whenever it has a pinned public key, it does the discovery, checks that the root CA that it discovers matches that pin. This gets tricky. There's sort of like two scenarios that Joe named swizzled clusters or self-stitching clusters. So the swizzled case is where you're like running the commands. You run the init command, and then you copy paste the join, and you run the join. That case is easy, and we can make that case safe by default. You can avoid this possibility.
Longer copy though, longer thing to copy.
It's a little bit longer copy. It has an extra hash, an extra flag. The self-stitching case is where you generate a token ahead of time in like CloudFormation or Terraform, and then you spin everything up with that token. That case is really hard to secure, so my proposal is we just leave that alone. We let it work the current way it does, but document it as having this weakened security model. And then I sort of propose some phases of how to roll this out, including potentially adding a flag to kubeatom join that eventually we make mandatory that says this is unsafe. Like if I'm not pinning a cert, it's unsafe. I'm interested in your proposal, your thoughts on like general proposal, and also especially on the phased rollout. Any questions?
Yeah, so actually it is possible for the self-stitching cluster where you have to provide the CA, you have to know the CA in advance, of course, and then you manually take the hash of that CA and add it to the token, and then just somehow make the CA land on the master node where it's and kubeatom will use it. So I think it's worth like instead documenting that if you really do this, like you have this kind of control, so it's not a problem.
Yeah, I tried to build the data, the format of the hash, so that it's easy to get it with like the OpenSSL command line. So it should be pretty amenable to, if you do want to do that kind of orchestration in Terraform or something like that, it should be pretty straightforward to get the right hash value and copy. I know Joe's, the other caveat with that approach is you end up having to pass the secret key for the root CA through
you have to somehow
cloud
get that
metadata
someplace,
or something.
yeah.
But that's something that, like, as someone who's implementing a particular orchestration protocol, like, you can figure that out.
I think in terms of the documentation, I think what we're gonna, if you look at the sort of final step of the phase, is you either have to pass a pin, or you have to pass a flag that says, hey, I know I'm not passing a pin. And so then we document that if you're using that flag that says I'm not passing a pin, then now you're operating in a weakened state. The truth of the matter, though, is that if you are, like, it's probably less secure from a sort of risk perspective, or at least riskier, to be passing private key data around in any way, shape, or form across a wire versus the attack vector around having these tokens reused, right? I would take the token reuse over the attack vector any day.
Yeah, it's definitely questionable. I think it's
over the passing around.
I think if we sort of like break out the cases where one is like the manual case where somebody's experimenting with kubeatom or they're running it on hardware, we can make that case safe by default where they're copy pasting the commands around. And then the other case where somebody's building some orchestration, that should be possible. It should be possible to make that secure. It just might be a little bit harder because you need to do some orchestration around the keys instead of just generating a token out of band.
Yeah, also, if you have this kind of Terraform something orchestration machine level, you already can pass the full flag, right? The full file. So
yes.
with the full CA, trust, and like...
You don't necessarily need Bootstrap, yeah. Yeah, so I think I like this better than my original sketch of this stuff because it's completely additive on top of what we have now. We're just adding an extra layer of checking, and so it's much less invasive than sort of rethinking this from sort of the ground up.
So we verify a detached signature of the JWT that we received from the Bootstrap API today. So this adds extra check. How is it not a duplicated check? I guess would be my question. If that secret leaks, I guess is what you're trying to, that is the attack that you're trying to prevent.
Yeah, so if that secret leaks, and actually the way I've got this implemented right now, I'll have some code to share pretty soon. Actually during that very initial insecure connection that the client makes to get the cluster info, I added some code in there that saves off the certificate chain from that connection. So then you go through, you validate, and once you get the cluster info, just check the symmetric HMAC just like before. Then you check the key pins, and now you know the root CA cert. So then you can go back to that original certificate chain retroactively and validate it and bail out if it wasn't secure. So basically, it actually lets you, we can do a little bit more certificate validation against that very first connection that we weren't doing before too.
So, but Mike, I think if we take a step back, if we weren't worrying about the self-stitching case where like all the information is created a priori, then we might be able to simplify the whole thing and use this key pin as the only way to actually verify the Bootstrap info, and so that might be simpler. But I think doing that, but then also supporting, before Heptio, Moyer was, using kubeadmin to actually stitch clusters together. And when he found the sort of self-stitching stuff, he's like, oh man, this is a hell of a lot easier than having to sort of extract stuff and move it around. So I think there's a usability sort of, factor here that we get with the current scheme that I don't want to throw away as we try and lock this down further.
Sure. What I would want to see explored is what would the situation be that the key used to sign the JWTs in the Bootstrap signer could be leaked, where the private key of the serving certificate would not be leaked? Like what situation would that be? Would it be a compromise of the master? It seems like the answer is no to that. It seems like that would just leak both. So what does this add? What attacks does this prevent beyond what we currently do?
So a compromise of the master leaks everything no matter what, pretty much. But a compromise of a worker node, the worker node has the symmetric token that's signing the tokens, but it doesn't have the private key of the root CA that's on the master or offline. And then in addition to like a full worker node compromise, I think that's one scenario. Another scenario is like the reason we have these discovery tokens is because we're going to pass them through some kind of orchestration to the worker nodes when they spin up. And that might be like a file on disk on a hardware, or it might be like EC2 metadata or something like that. If it's something like EC2 metadata, there's lots of ways that might leak via server-side request forgery or things like that leak information back from the worker node to an attacker, even though the
poorly configured
node
proxy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I will have to go back and review all that stuff, but I'll take a look at the proposal and.
Yeah. I think that this one is a hell of a lot simpler than the last thing I proposed.
Good. So it's incredibly complex.
No, I actually don't think it was that complex. I just think it was more invasive. I'll stand by it, but like that's a different discussion.
The one big thing about this proposal is it doesn't actually change anything on the server side. The Kubernetes API server and the controller stay exactly are. This is just a change to kubeadm.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take a look. And just a technicality, probably a gist is not the best way to receive feedback. I don't know if you can do line commenting on a gist.
Yeah, okay, I'll copy over to Google Docs.
I've been doing it as just because it's like super easy to then turn it into a markdown thing where it's like docs. Oh,
sure.
God. Yeah, they all suck.
Yeah.
So I put it in the comments. The other thing, as we look at sort of like, as we move, out of beta and try and lock this stuff down, the other change that I'd like to float making is to make the default. So when you do a kubeadmin init, the first token that actually gets created as the init has unlimited lifetime unless you pass a flag saying, I want to restrict this down. I'd like to change the default of that flag to something that's like 2 hours or something like that, which means that by default, you bring up a cluster and that token ages out. If you want to do adding nodes later, you can create a new token, or if you can pass the command line that says, give me an unlimited token, right? But default to something that's more secure and don't have these sort of like zombie tokens that last forever.
I think that makes sense. That's probably the most vulnerable thing we have right now in this flow to have them on forever. But maybe, we can discuss the duration there later, but maybe a day or something. So
there's arguments both ways, but I think, we can pick a default that's not forever.
Yeah.
It's definitely better than forever, and then make that change.
Yeah, one question about the proposal. So we're still going to use the Bootstrap signer controller, or will we still use the short version 6 chars and 16 chars, or will we just use the new CA hash?
It would be both, and we also talked about potentially putting the new verification data sort of munched together into the same, so it's one token that just is longer.
Yeah.
I decided I liked it better as a second, another parameter is it's cleaner, I think, than to understand that is separate and you could strip off that flag, that it's like it's additional verification, it's separate from the main discovery process. I do certainly think that in the scenarios where you can do this using this new validation step, we could get rid of the Bootstrap signer, but that eliminates the sort of easy self-stitching case that's moderately secure. I don't have a good context for whether that's worth it or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
Cool.
I don't want to throw away the self-stitching scenario. I think it's incredibly valuable. And in terms of like code churn and changes, this is purely additive on the client side. Versus if we wanted to remove the signer, we'd have to, it'd be more difficult in terms of more impacting.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's easier to upgrade as well when thinking about that. If we keep that.
The other thing that I wish we had done, and it was a miss, is that the token, we probably should have given the token some sort of prefix, like KA for kubeadmin or something like that, or KB for Kubernetes Bootstrap. And then use that as the key in the authorizer, because right now the authorizer just looks for the pattern. It might be worthwhile to make that change, in this cycle too, but that's a server-side change.
Yeah.
Are there any characters which cannot be generated by the token generation?
It's hex right now.
Hex?
I think we see alphanumeric that's dot separated. I think is the official spec.
So you could grab a colon, right? You could do Kate's colon. It's not going to collide with.
It's not a thing of collision. It just means that like So the way that the authorizers work is that they look at a token and they're like, a bunch of them like, hey, does this look like one of my tokens? Does this look like one of my tokens? And you want that thing to be as, as reliable as possible. And right now, the Bootstrap authorizer, it looks for the 6.16 format, whether it matches a regular expression, which is probably good enough, but it's not as crystal clear as saying, okay, it's got to start with, say, a KB colon or something like that.
I think that's worthwhile to a change we should make in 1.8, because it only touches kubeadm join and the Bootstrap token authenticator itself. I mean, kubeadm join just prefixes with something, and the authenticator just looks for the prefix. So.
Right. Well, that's obviously separable from Moyer's proposal, but I think as long as we're sort of thinking about what is on our laundry list around this stuff, that's probably there too.
Yeah, and also the group thing to make the token able to authenticate as certain groups is one thing we have to get in for AJ, etc. Yeah, but let's take that discussion some other time.
Okay, Luke.
I just wanted to flag 3 minutes left, and there's one more item on the agenda, which is Lucas talks about 1.7 issues, so it might be worth just finishing the meeting with that.
Yeah, so just a quick heads up. I talked about the first one, that the node name has to be configurable, at least on AWS, where the cloud provider sets it to some value from the metadata server, which is totally different than the OS host name. And also some other environments where, well, there have been a couple of users reporting that. Then we had a race condition between the API server and the controller manager, a really fun one, that basically made the Bootstrap signers or token cleaners or whatever other controllers credentials to not be the RBAC rules weren't created, so then they were non-functional, which took the expression of kubeadm join not working. So, but that has been fixed and is already cherry picked for 1.7.1. One thing which isn't directly related to kubeadmin, but container metrics from the kubelet metrics endpoint that are populated from cAdvisor have disappeared due to some, well, it wasn't known at all that it would just go away like that. We hadn't any testing coverage, it seems, because it was some user that reported it. But this basically means for kubeadmin, since we disable the public cAdvisor port in 1.7, which is unauthenticated, there is no way to get container metrics from Prometheus or whatever in 1.7.0 at least. I think since it was an issue, a regression from 1.6, I think it's going to be fixed, the root cause. But anyway, it was even more severe with kubeadm clusters due to that we have the public cAdvisor 4194 secured. So yeah, those are the three most important ones.
I think we're going to be seeing more and more of this as more folks use kubeadmin. If there are problems that are more systemic to a release, we're a little bit more on the bleeding edge in terms of enabling new things like RBAC and trying to lock down all these insecure ports and stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice problem to have.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else want to say anything in the last 30 seconds of the meeting? Okay, I'll give you 20 seconds of your day back. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.